So now we move to the analysis. So now you know the changes, and Sam will go into it and also make the link with the other legislation. As Margot presented, this new directive comes with a broader package and has interactions with many legislation. So that's worth also to navigate through the maze and understand what, focusing specifically on the energy saving obligation, what it means. Sam, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jean-Sébastien, and thank you so much, Margot, for a great explanation of the main changes to the energy savings obligation. So in my presentation, I will, I guess, partly reinforce what you've just said, because as you explained, some of it is quite complicated, particularly, for example, the fossil fuel exclusion. But as Jean-Sébastien said, I'm going to focus a little bit more on the wider package. So before I get going, just a brief introduction to me. So I'm Sam Thomas from the Regulatory Assistance Project. We're an NGO dedicated to accelerating the energy transition. And today I'm going to talk about this publication, which Jean-Sébastien mentioned in his introduction. So this was published in July, soon after the final agreement of the changes to the EED, but also many other parts of the Fit for 55 package. I would say it's kind of broad and shallow in that it really does cover the whole of the package, or at least the bits of the package that do interact with the energy savings obligation. And during the ENSMOV Plus project, we will be diving deeper on specific aspects. Before I get going, just very, very briefly, you're going to see some shorthand in the slides. So this is our abbreviations and acronyms list. Just a couple of them that I thought I should mention that some of you may be less familiar with. So MEPS, 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 this is the Minimum Energy Performance Standards that are part of the ongoing negotiations for the new EPBD, which is third in that list, the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive. A couple of others, ETD, Energy Taxation Directive. That is another part of the Fit for 55 package that has not been fully resolved and may never be resolved. Let's see. And obviously NECPs, you should know those. NECPR, these are the reports that member states produce on progress on their NECPs. And then at the bottom, we've got the Social Climate Fund and the Social Climate Plans. We'll come on to that as we go through the slides. So as Margot set out, and as Jean-Sébastien just said, we see the three main aspects of the three most important aspects of the changes to the energy savings obligation itself, being one, more ambition, and we can see the stepwise changes there that Margot also set out. And that means, in effect, because as I'm sure people on this webinar will know, if they're stakeholders on this article of the EED, the obligation is cumulative. So it's basically the area under the curve from 2021 to 2030. Those are the energy savings you need to make. And so the impact on the overall obligation that member states have in total between 2021 and 2030 from this stepwise change is a 44% increase in the energy savings that need to be delivered across all member states. Now, because it's a cumulative obligation, it gets progressively more difficult to catch up if you're behind. So this means that in terms of implementing the recast, it's quite urgent, really, that member states do redesign their policy measures so that they are more ambitious, or bring in new policy measures in order to achieve their obligations. And of course, that is aligned with the need to tackle the climate problem urgently and stay within the EU's carbon budgets. The second area is this focus on a just and inclusive energy transition, and specifically in this article on energy poverty alleviation. And of course, this ties in with the multiple benefits of energy efficiency, and also the risk that if we just focus on meeting our climate goals and our energy efficiency targets, that will lead to an inequitable or unjust transition. And if you think about the types of policy measures that member states have focused on in delivering their energy savings obligations, thinking about EEOs, energy efficiency obligation schemes, and the incentives that obligated parties face, that is to deliver them as cost effectively to them as possible. And that would naturally mean a focus on participants that are able to pay a share of the investment costs, which would naturally lead to those in energy poverty or those unable to pay, low income, vulnerable, missing out. Similarly, if you have a subsidy scheme and it's not targeted at particular income groups, we know that those with higher incomes are more likely to access those subsidy schemes. So without additional policy intervention, and we've seen this when we've looked at member states that, for example, have introduced ring fences within their obligation schemes compared to those member states that have relied on additional incentives to obligated parties to deliver to energy poor groups. We've basically seen that without having a sub-target amongst priority groups, you just don't get the level of delivery amongst those groups that would lead to this just and inclusive transition. So that's the second element. The third element, well, I've already mentioned the fact that the ambition is aligned with climate goals. And that, of course, is the fossil fuel exclusion that Margot very helpfully explained. Yeah, so this is very clearly aligned with climate goals and the need to avoid lock-in to fossil fuel combustion technologies that will last for 10, 15 more years if installed now, and would clearly not be in line with meeting our climate goals. Now, there are some other changes which I thought I should very briefly mention, but I'm not going to focus on these at all. So there are some, I guess, sort of sectoral changes or changes to specific technology focuses or changes related to specific groups in the EED. One particularly welcome change, I think, is the solar thermal heat can be excluded from end-use energy consumption, which may be seem like a very geeky point, but this means essentially that if you put in solar thermal heating, then you can get virtually 100% energy savings from that, because the heat that you're transferring from outside to your building no longer counts in terms of energy consumption. So if you're replacing gas, for example, or even electricity, then you're reducing that energy consumption, and the energy consumption that you're making of solar thermal heat will not count. So you get some big savings now from introducing solar thermal heat, which of course is also aligned with the climate goals. And then there are some other, I guess, probably more weaker provisions here. So one is around requiring that actions in multi-apartment buildings are eligible in obligation schemes. So this means just that obligated parties can, if they wish, take actions in multi-apartment buildings. And then there's a even weaker aspect of the article, I think, which is around the necessity to consider and promote the role of energy communities in delivering actions. Then there are some of the other aspects that Margot mentioned that are really around ensuring that the energy savings obligation is more effective in delivering on its objectives as a set of provisions. And one of those is the link to the meeting of the EU energy efficiency target itself. So member states will now need to demonstrate that their policy measures that they're delivering, the energy savings that they're delivering through their policy measures under the energy savings obligation are actually helping to meet the energy efficiency target. A second one is around, which Margot mentioned, around the objective of achieving final energy savings. And the third one here is around the effectiveness of taxation measures, which I would say probably have the kind of, at the moment, or before the recast, taxation measures, I think, got off a little lightly in terms of the necessity of explaining how the energy savings were achieved. So the new directive makes it clear that member states need to explain how they've arrived at the how the effectiveness of the taxation measures has been arrived at, and in practice that will mean explaining more about the elasticities that have been used and how they've been used in order to reach the energy savings that are being reported, and also how those taxation measures avoid double counting with other policy measures that may interact with them. And finally, and this is where I will move on to now, there are lots of provisions around additionality to other aspects of the of EU law, many of which were in the Fit for 55 package, and this is what I'm going to come on to in the rest of this presentation. Whoops, I double click and it's triple click. Okay, so it's just a nice picture of the Fit for 55, and as you can see, Energy Efficiency Directive is just one element of that jigsaw. And what we see when we look at these other aspects of the Fit for 55 package is that some of them support the achievement of member states' obligation by essentially creating new opportunities for energy efficiency, or by requiring member states to deliver on other objectives where energy efficiency is most likely to be the most cost-effective option, or at least one of the cost-effective options for meeting those obligations. So, well, we're going to come on to a number of those in a moment. And the second one is around where where the other measures reduce the potential for energy savings under the obligation. And here, this is because EU law has been tightened, and so the additionality to EU law cuts off some of the energy savings that could be made. Overall, we think that the supporting aspects will significantly outweigh the reduction in potential. So in terms of the things that will support member states meeting their obligations, I've listed them here: effort sharing, other aspects of the EED, the Renewable Energy Directive, the Social Climate Fund, the MEPS aspects of the EPBD, the ranking criterion in the ETD, which may be a new one on some of you. I'll come to that in a moment, and the Repower EU, as Margot was saying. And then on the other side of the scales, we've got the ETS1 free allocation rule, which I'll also come to. Eco-design updates. I mean, they're kind of slightly outside of the Fit for 55 package, but obviously eco-design is really important when it comes to additionality. There's the new buildings aspects of the EPBD. And there's another aspect of the ETD, the Energy Taxation Directive, around minimum taxation levels. And then in the middle of this Venn diagram, there are some directives that have a broadly neutral, or they have two countervailing effects. One of those is ETS2, and the other one is the new vehicle CO2 regulations. So, sorry, my mouse is extremely sensitive. So starting with effort sharing, this is clearly supportive. So member states have higher effort sharing regulation targets. So these are their carbon emissions reduction targets for sectors outside of ETS1, the original ETS sectors. And those higher effort sharing regulation targets can be met most cost effectively by a policy mix that includes plenty of energy efficiency. So if member states are going to meet their emissions reductions targets, they're going to need energy efficiency policies to help them. Now, the ESR targets are very different depending on which member state you're in. Some member states, the wealthier member states, have got very, very demanding ESR targets. The least wealthy countries have ESR targets that are much less demanding. But an important point to remember is that emissions reductions can be traded between member states. So there are still opportunities to make energy efficiency gains through policy and then trade those to member states that are finding it much more difficult to meet their targets. Then staying at this kind of the highest level of the climate and energy package of measures. So you've got effort sharing regulation on one side, you've got the ETS on the other. the ETS1, so this is the current ETS, we see that while higher prices during as a result of the tightening of many of the ETS1 rules will have a broadly neutral effect, the free allocation role that is linked to the EED will have the effect of reducing the potential available for member states. So what Article 10A of the ETS directive covers is the free allocation of allowances to industrial installations that are at risk of carbon leakage, essentially. So it's a kind of protection mechanism for those installations. And that's extremely valuable because you get a free allocation and then you can either continue emitting fossil fuels or you can sell that allocation. And as we've seen, the price of ETS allowances is going up. So this is an extremely valuable thing for those installations that get them. And that, of course, means that if there are some restrictions on whether the free allocation can be accessed, that is a very, very strong incentive for those installations to comply with this Article 10A of the ETS directive. And because of that very, very strong incentive, this cuts off the ability of the EED, energy savings obligation policy measures, to access those savings that would be required under the ETS directive. We just have a look and see what it actually is. So basically, for installations that are also regulated under Article 11 of the EED, this is on energy management and audits, when they have an audit, and there are audit recommendations made, they must take up all of the recommendations with a payback of 3 years or less, unless the costs are disproportionate. So, there are some derogations in there. And as long as they do that, then they can access 20%, the remaining 20% of their free allocation. If they don't do that, then 20% of their free allocation is at risk of not being allocated to them. So that is that aspect that is clearly going to reduce potential for policy measures that were targeted at ETS installations that get free allocation, trying to encourage them to take up cost-effective actions. Then staying on the ETS and looking at ETS2. So as Margaret said, this introduces emissions trading of direct emissions from buildings, road transport and small industry. Of course, the indirect emissions from electricity use were already covered under ETS1. And what we see here, that the impact of ETS2 is going to be that there's going to be higher fossil energy prices, just as there is with ETS1. And essentially, if you think about the energy efficiency actions that may be triggered by those higher energy prices, if you think about a kind of curve of energy efficiency actions from the most cost effective to the least cost effective, you're essentially going to sort of shift both the top end of that curve and cut off the bottom end of that curve. So some energy efficiency actions will now be easier to support from policy measures. So things that were not cost effective before will now become cost effective with policy support. And on the other side, there will be some measures at the bottom of that curve that previously needed policy support, but no longer need policy support because of those higher prices. But of course, it's important to recognize that prices are only one aspect in the decision making, particularly amongst ETS2. But I mean, even in ETS1 and these industrial, energy intensive industrial installations, which you would think would be the most sensitive to energy prices and therefore most likely to take up energy efficiency actions as a result of high prices, even amongst those actions, the need to reduce free allocation associated with the take-up of energy efficiency policy measures recognizes the fact that even in those sectors, high energy prices will not necessarily drive the energy efficiency gains that we need to see, and that these other policy measures, the types of policy measures that are delivered through the energy savings obligation, are absolutely vital in achieving a societally cost-effective outcome. And of course, in ETS2, that's much more the case, where we see that energy prices, while important, are much less important than other policy drivers in delivering energy efficiency action. Now, linked to the ETS directive, we have the Social Climate Fund, which is a fund of up to 65 billion euros between 2026 and 2032. So it comes in before the before ETS2 starts in 2027, and it's funded through ETS auction revenues. And to access that fund, member states need to put together some social climate plans, which would explain how they would spend the fund in line with the with its objectives. And member states will need to co-fund 25%. And a key aspect of the criteria for accessing the social climate fund is that it focuses on vulnerable households, vulnerable micro enterprises, and vulnerable transport users. And I particularly focus on the vulnerable households here because obviously when we look at the energy savings obligation, we have the new priority group, and this matches onto that extremely well and should help member states in meeting their energy poverty ring fence in the energy savings obligation. Some other aspects that are important, I think, of the Social Climate Fund. One is that you can use it for temporary income support. So if you think about ETS2, it's going to drive up fossil fuel prices. How can you help protect vulnerable households, micro enterprises, and transport users from the worst effects of that? Well, you can do two things. You can give money, provide income support to counteract that price increase, which has a short-term impact and needs to be repeated every year. Or you can take energy efficiency actions, which will help those groups to reduce their energy bills. And once those actions are taken place, they have a long-lasting effect. What the SCF regulation is trying to do is encourage energy efficiency actions while also recognizing that there might be a need for temporary income support. But that's why there's a maximum of 37.5% that can be spent on income support. So it's giving a clear signal that energy efficiency actions, which of course can count towards the energy savings obligation, should be prioritized. And one final thing is that they cannot replace recurring national funding. So you can't just essentially claim the social climate fund by saying in your social climate plan that you're going to do things that you're already doing in through your national budgets. So that's generally supportive. Then the EED itself, so coming down from the kind of highest level to the individual directives. So on the EED, just thought I'd mention a few of the other articles. So Article 4, final energy consumption reduction target. So, and indeed the efficiency first measures as well. These sort of overarching articles at the top of the directive. Essentially, we're going to need more ambitious policy measures in order to deliver on them. And then we've got the public sector provisions that Margot set out, and Annex 5 confirms that these savings can count. And then Article 11 on energy management and audits. Again, Margot mentioned this. So this is slightly more nuanced, but overall, I think it's positive. So it reduces the scope for savings from some national audit requirements by expanding the number of organizations that need to have an audit, but it does increase the number of audited companies and requires that there are action plans. So it should essentially provide more of a ripe field for energy savings policy measures that build on the back of energy audit action plans. Then on to the Renewable Energy Directive. I'm not going to spend longer on this one, just to say that there's a renewables target and energy efficiency actions can help to meet that target. And the new renewables target is more ambitious. There's also a mandatory heating and cooling target. And guess what? Energy efficiency actions help meet that target too. And there's also an energy supply and buildings target. And again, energy efficiency actions can help to meet that target. How can energy efficiency help to meet the renewables target? Well, in two ways. So first of all, a lot of energy efficiency actions also count as renewable energy. So for example, if you put in a heat pump or solar thermal, that's going to count towards your renewable energy target. But the crucial thing, I think, is that all energy efficiency can help to meet the renewables targets because they're all defined in terms of a ratio. So renewable energy divided by all energy. And you can either increase the numerator or you can decrease the denominator. And both of those things help to meet renewable energy directed targets. So hopefully your renewable energy colleagues will be coming knocking on your door looking for more ambitious energy efficiency policies to help meet these renewable energy targets. Then on the new vehicle CO2 regs, so moving across to transport, to be honest, the new EU fleet average standard targets won't have a massive impact, and that's because already the new vehicle CO2 regs meant that the EED energy savings obligation was not able to make many energy savings, and that's because it essentially, because these targets are fleet average standards, they effectively set the reference energy consumption of any new vehicle supported by national policy measures. But the more ambitious targets may mean that there are some kind of small effects around the margins if essentially the level of CO2 in the fleet as a whole is accelerated downwards more quickly than in the past. That means that early replacement policy measures may now save more energy. So if essentially if you're replacing a 10-year-old vehicle with a new electric vehicle, then that's going to save more money, more energy in the future than it did in the past because the targets are getting more and more ambitious. But it's a really very, very small effect, which is why we put it in the middle of this diagram. Now,
Sam, just
have I run out of time?
to say, yes, if you can speed up a bit for the last slide, thanks.
Right, EPBD, that's been covered, I think, already. Just to say that there may be a restriction on support for fossil fuel boilers, but it's still being negotiated. But the new building regs will reduce the scope for national building codes to count, but already that was quite a small aspect. Energy taxation directive, probably should spend very little time on this, given that it's got a low likelihood of actually making it into new EU law. But higher minimum taxation rates would obviously reduce the scope for taxation measures from member states. But there's a new ranking criterion in the proposal, which would improve the economics of switching to electrically powered equipment, which generally are much more efficient. So that would be on the positive side. Eco design, we know, reduces the energy savings you can get from equipment replacements. And this is because because often the eco design minimum standards are used as the reference for savings by member states. And eco design reviews are ongoing. One thing to look out for is potentially on the space heating equipment, where if there was a rule requiring more than 100% efficiency for heating equipment, that would both support uptake and reduce the additional energy savings from heat pumps. But basically, it would be extremely positive in terms of driving through heat pump uptake, which can deliver massive energy savings for reporting to the energy savings obligation. Finally, on Repower EU, I'm not going to focus on this one because Margot already covered it, but just to reiterate the point that we will be discussing how to evaluate energy savings from behavioural measures and campaigns at the Behave conference on the 28th of November, where I'll be joined by Margot again. So looking forward to that discussion. Sorry for spending so long on it. Here's all the partners again, and thank you.